The train hissed like a serpent as it ground to a halt, its wheels screeching over iron tracks that shimmered in the afternoon heat. A curtain of dust billowed along the platform as passengers disembarked, boots thudding on warped wood, the scent of coal smoke hanging in the air like old regret. Clara Bell descended carefully, clutching her valise with one hand and smoothing the fabric of her best blue dress with the other. It had been ironed to perfection that morning in the cramped washroom of the eastbound train. Her gloves were a little frayed, her hat a bit too wide, but she stood tall. She had come too far to shrink now. Ironwood Gulch wasn't much to look at, just a street of leaning buildings, a saloon that never slept, and a church that mostly did. Dust seemed to cling to everything, buildings, windows, even the people. Her eyes swept the small crowd gathered around the station. They swept past her. Men greeted wives and barked orders to porters. No one approached. No one matched the photograph folded in the letter she kept close to her chest. Until he stepped out from the shadow of the depot, broad-chested, square-jawed, dressed in a dark duster, and flanked by a sneer that might have once passed for charm. Roy Pritchard. Their eyes met. Hers softened. His narrowed. Clara offered a hopeful smile and stepped forward. "Mr. Pritchard?" Roy's face hardened like poured concrete. "You're Clara?" She nodded, her heart skittering. "Yes, sir. I came just like you asked. From Missouri. I hope." "You didn't say you were," he trailed off, eyes dragging down her body with thinly veiled disgust. "Big bone." The words dropped like lead between them. Clara flinched, but didn't retreat. "I mentioned I was full-figured," she replied, voice steady though her fingers curled tighter around her valise. "You said you liked strong women." "I meant strong like spirited, not," he waved a hand vaguely. "Farm-fed." A few townsfolk paused nearby, watching now. One man chuckled behind a bushy mustache. A girl whispered to her friend. The shame flared hot in Clara's chest, not from her size, never from that, but from the sudden, brutal exposure of being unwanted. "I made a mistake," Roy said bluntly. "You can head back on the next train." "There is no next train," she replied, chin lifting. "It only comes twice a week." "Then wait it out. Ain't my problem." He turned, boots grinding against the platform, and strode away without a backward glance. Clara stood still for a moment too long. The sun bore down. Her chest ached not from heartbreak, but humiliation. She'd traveled hundreds of miles with hope tucked into every seam of her dress, and now that hope bled out with each step Roy took away from her. A woman with a tight bun and a tighter mouth muttered, "Well, maybe she should have sent a real picture." Another voice whispered, "Serves her right, trying to trap a man like that." Clara's spine straightened. She walked, not back toward the train, but down the dusty street, heels clicking against broken boards. Each step was a refusal to cry, a refusal to vanish. She passed the general store, the telegraph office, the creaky old barber shop, all eyes on her. Her grip on her valise never loosened. The boarding house stood near the edge of town, tucked between the livery and a sagging mercantile. Clara knocked. A matronly woman answered, her face drawn and tired. "I need a room," Clara said, "just for a night or two." "We're full," the woman said without checking. Her eyes flicked down Clara's frame and back up, lips tight. Clara swallowed the bitterness. "I'll pay." "There's no room," the woman repeated, and closed the door without waiting. The sun had begun its slow descent, turning the sky from cobalt to blood orange. Clara wandered into the edge of town, gave way to a scattering of sheds and barns. The scent of hay and horse sweat thick in the air. A small hayloft sat open, empty save for scattered straw and a broken rake. She climbed the ladder and settled her valise against a beam. It wasn't shelter, not really, but it was quiet, private. She pulled off her gloves, smoothed her skirt, and stared at the splinters in the wooden walls. Her stomach growled, but she had no appetite. Shame did that, tied your insides in knots until even hunger gave up. Night settled fast in the west. Coyotes howled from the distant hills, and a whippoorwill cried once, then went silent. Clara lay back on the straw, staring through a crack in the roof at a single lonely star. Her fingers found the letter again, the one from Roy. She unfolded it slowly, letting her eyes trace the kind words, the hopeful promises, the lies. A shadow crossed the light. "You planning to stay there all night?" Clara bolted upright. A man stood at the edge of a loft, just beyond the ladder, lit by moonlight and smoke. He was tall, taller than Roy, with wide shoulders and sleeves rolled up to the elbows. His beard was dark, his expression unreadable, but his voice was gravel-rich and calm. "I'm not here to cause trouble," she said quickly, pulling her valise close. "Didn't say you were." He stepped up into the loft, his boots silent on the ladder. He wore a flannel shirt rolled at the cuffs, and had the kind of stillness that made people uneasy, like a bear deciding whether to rest or charge. "I saw what happened at the station." Clara looked away. "Fella's an ass," he added. She said nothing. He crouched beside her, not too close. "You got a name?" "Clara," she said. "Clara Bell." "I'm Elias. Elias McCrae." Silence settled between them like dust. "You planning to sleep here tonight?" "I didn't exactly have another plan." "You hungry?" She glanced at him, wary. "Why?" "Because I was about to cook beans. And because no one should end their first day in town on a pile of hay with an empty stomach and that look in their eyes." "What look?" "The one that says you're trying real hard not to fall apart." Clara stared at him, lips parting, but no words came. He stood, offering a calloused hand. "My place isn't much, but it's warm. You can sleep on the cot. Just for the night." She hesitated. "I don't pity you," he added. "I don't know you well enough to do that. But I sure as hell won't let you sleep in a barn like a stray dog." Clara took his hand. As they stepped out into the night, the stars seemed a little closer, the wind a little softer. Somewhere far behind them, the town still whispered. But ahead, past the trees and into the hills, a different story waited. And for the first time since she arrived, Clara let herself believe it might be worth finding out how it ended. Elias's cabin stood at the edge of the world. Clara had never seen a home like it, half hidden beneath towering pines, smoke rising from a crooked stone chimney, a small porch with 2 chairs and a stump for splitting wood. It was rough, weathered, and sturdy, much like the man who led her there. No lace curtains or polished floors, but it had the quiet dignity of a place that had weathered storms and survived. He opened the door and stepped aside. "After you." She hesitated on the threshold. The air inside smelled of cedar, ash, and something faintly sweet, maybe molasses. A cast-iron stove hummed in the corner, and on a shelf above it sat 3 tin mugs and a carved wooden bear. It was a bachelor's cabin, plain but cared for. Elias dropped his coat on a peg by the door and moved straight to the stove. "There's beans. Not fancy, but they're hot." Clara set her valise down by the wall and sank slowly onto the bench at the rough-hewn table. Her muscles ached from days of travel. Her pride still throbbed from the day's public disgrace. But the warmth from the fire reached her bones, and for the first time since arriving in Ironwood Gulch, her hands stopped shaking. He ladled beans into 2 chip bowls and set them down without ceremony. Clara murmured a thank you, and they ate in silence for a while, save for the occasional clink of spoons. The food wasn't remarkable, but it was warm and filling, and not served with judgment. "You're not from around here," he said finally. "I came from Missouri." "You plan to stay in Ironwood?" She paused, then offered a dry smile. "Didn't plan to be sleeping in haylofts, either. Plans change." He nodded, neither offering sympathy nor brushing it aside. "You're welcome to stay here a few nights, till you figure things out." "That's kind of you." He shrugged. "Cabin's got space. And you don't seem like the fainting type." A flicker of amusement rose in her. "Not much use for fainting when you grow up hauling water twice a day." "Strong-backed and iron-willed," he said, lips curling into the barest hint of a smile. "Town's full of fools." She let the compliment settle in the quiet between them, unsure what to do with it. No one had called her strong before, not in a way that felt like respect. That night, he gave her the cot and took the floor without protest. She heard him shift only once, when the wind rattled the shutters, and otherwise, he slept like a man used to solitude. In the morning, she woke to the smell of coffee and the scrape of metal against wood. Elias was sharpening an axe, eyes narrowed in focus. His flannel shirt hung loose on his frame, sleeves rolled, forearms corded with muscle. He didn't speak at first, and neither did she. There was a strange peace in the silence, like the forest itself had taught them both how to breathe without filling space with words. By the third day, she was sweeping the floor and boiling water for stew. By the fourth, she was patching the knees of Elias's work trousers and scrubbing soot from the stovepipe. He never asked her to. She needed purpose, and the cabin gave it. Every chore was a foothold on the cliff of her shame, something to steady her climb back to herself. "You don't owe me for staying," he said one afternoon as she was chopping vegetables. "I know," she replied, "but I feel better when I'm useful." He accepted that. Elias wasn't a man who tried to fix people. He let them be who they were, and maybe that was why she found herself watching him when he wasn't looking, noticing how he'd whistle low and tuneless while stacking firewood, how he'd sit by the fire and whittle pieces of pine into shapes he never showed her. There was grief in him, deep and buried, but not sharp anymore. More like worn-down rock, heavy and settled. "You ever been married?" she asked once, careful with the question. He paused, then shook his head. "Almost. Long time ago. Fire took her." "I'm sorry." He didn't answer. Didn't need to. The words settled like ashes. Days passed. The forest turned golden in the afternoons, and the wind grew colder. Elias taught her how to split kindling with quick, sure swings. Her hands blistered. He wrapped them in cloth and told her to curse the pain, not hide from it. One evening, they sat on the porch as the sun dropped low. The sky turned violet, the trees cast long shadows, and the crickets sang. "You're not what I expected," he said quietly. Clara arched her brow. "What did you expect?" "Someone broken." "I was," she admitted. "And now," she looked out at the trees. "Now I think I'm just bent. And bending's not the same as breaking." He smiled at that. Not with his mouth, his eyes. He didn't offer platitudes or flattery. He simply reached for the whittled object in his coat pocket, then paused, thought better of it, and let his hand fall. The peace they found in each other was fragile, made of unspoken truths and careful steps. But it was real. Until the day the world came knocking. Clara had gone into town for the first time since her arrival. She needed fabric, some sugar, and, more than anything, the proof that she could walk into the general store and not lower her gaze, that she could stand where they'd scorned her and feel nothing but wind on her skin. She left with her head high and her parcel clutched tight, and nearly made it out before she heard her name. "Clara Bell," drawled a familiar voice. Roy Pritchard stepped from the saloon's swinging doors, drink in hand, eyes bloodshot. "You still around?" She froze, then turned slowly. "I heard you moved in with that lumber brute." "What, he's not picky or just blind?" A few men chuckled behind him. Clara said nothing, just stared, hard and flat. "Didn't think you had it in you," Roy continued, swaggering closer. "Throwing yourself at the first man who'd have you." A thick silence fell. She didn't speak, didn't flinch, just looked him straight in the eye and walked away. When she returned to the cabin, Elias was chopping wood with a rhythm that spoke of simmering rage. She said nothing of the encounter. He didn't ask. But later, when she lit the fire and they sat across from each other in the flickering warmth, she found herself studying the lines around his eyes, the way he looked at her, not like something to endure, but someone to witness. "You ever think about leaving this place?" she asked softly. "Sometimes," he said. "But then I remember, no matter where you go, you still carry yourself with you." She nodded, silent for a moment. "I thought I came here for a husband. And now I think I came to find out who I was without needing one." His gaze lingered. "And who is she?" "Still figuring it out," Clara said, smiling just a little. "But I like her." He didn't smile back, not exactly. But he reached into his pocket and finally pulled out the small whittled carving. A bird, simple but graceful, wings half lifted as if ready to fly. "For you," he said, offering it without flourish. Clara took it in both hands. Her voice caught on gratitude. "You don't owe me thanks," he said. "You saved yourself." The fire crackled. Outside, the wind shifted. And in that silence, something passed between them. Not quite a promise, not yet a confession, but something solid, something worth holding. Elias turned back to the fire. "They'll talk, about you staying here." "Let them," Clara said. "I've been stared at my whole life. I'd rather give them something worth watching." And in the quiet that followed, Clara realized she was no longer just surviving. She was beginning. The first sign of trouble came not with flames, but with the wind. It roared down from the mountains in a dry, crackling rush, hot and brittle as old bones. Trees groaned. Dust rose like ghosts from the forest floor. Elias paused with his axe mid-swing, nostrils flaring. Something was wrong. Clara stepped out onto the porch, squinting at the horizon. "What is it?" Elias didn't answer. He turned slowly, gaze scanning the treetops, the ridgelines. The birds were gone. The silence was not peace, it was warning. "Get your things," he said, voice low and firm. "Now." Clara didn't argue. She ducked inside, grabbing her valise, and the small pouch of essentials she kept tied with twine. Elias shoved a few supplies into a knapsack: jerky, matches, water flask. He pulled his rifle from above the hearth and slung it over his shoulder, without a word. They didn't run. Not yet. But they moved fast, down the path behind the cabin, away from the thickest brush, toward higher ground where the wind might show its hand. And then they saw it. Smoke. A long, gray smear rising from the eastern slope, turning the sky the color of a bruise. It wasn't just a brush fire. It was a wall. It was coming fast. "Damn lightning storm must have lit it yesterday," Elias muttered, eyes narrowing. "We're downwind." Clara's stomach tightened. Will it reach the cabin? Won't stop there. If the wind shifts, it'll eat Ironwood whole. They picked up speed, lungs burning with each step. Elias moved with instinct, cutting through trees, avoiding dry underbrush. Clara followed close, skirts gathered in her fists, her boots catching on roots and stones. The woods had always seemed majestic, eternal. Now it was a trap. By the time they reached the ridge, the smoke was thicker. Flames licked the treetops in the distance, snapping branches like dry twigs. Heat rolled across the landscape in waves. Clara's eyes watered. Elias wrapped a damp cloth around her face, then one around his own. "There's a stream down the west slope," he said, breath short. "If we can make it, we can follow it out. Might even reach the mining road." Clara nodded, too breathless to speak. She hadn't known she could move this fast, carry this much weight in her legs and lungs. Her arms ached. Her calves screamed. Still she ran. A tree cracked somewhere behind them, sharp and final. Then another. The fire was chasing them now, alive and greedy, feeding on pine needles and fear. A spark landed on Clara's skirt, smoldering for a moment. She slapped at it instinctively, stumbling. Elias caught her before she hit the ground. "Keep going," he urged. "Don't stop. Not for anything." They descended fast, weaving between rocks and stumps. Every breath felt scorched. Branches tore at her dress, scraped her skin. The smoke thickened, turning the world into shadow and ember. Her lungs begged for clean air. Still, she pushed forward. Then water. The stream was narrow and fast, cutting through a shallow ravine. Elias pulled her down the bank and into the icy current. It shocked her system, but it was relief. Real, clean, moving water. She gasped as it soaked her to the knees, but didn't complain. "Stay low," Elias ordered. "Follow it." So they did, slogging through mud and slippery stones, using the stream like a lifeline. The fire roared behind them, devouring acres with every breath. Trees groaned. Animals darted past them. Foxes, deer, even a bear crashing through underbrush in a blind panic. They didn't speak. There was no room for words. Time lost meaning. All that existed was fire, smoke, and the cold bite of water. Clara's legs trembled. Her soaked dress dragged behind her like an anchor. But she kept her eyes on Elias's back, on the sure way he moved, the steadiness in his stride even when the world burned. And then gunshots. Not behind them. Ahead. Elias paused, rifle halfway raised, eyes sharp. Someone's up ahead. They scrambled over a fallen log, and suddenly the trees opened into a clearing where a small hunting shack stood, half consumed by flames. A man staggered out, his face soot-streaked, coughing violently. Another figure followed, shorter, limping, her dress torn and face wild with fear. "Help us," the woman cried. "Please." Clara didn't hesitate. She ran to the girl, catching her before she collapsed. Elias hauled the man upright. "Streams behind us," Elias barked. "Follow it west. Go now." The couple didn't ask questions. Clara handed off her water pouch, pushing them toward safety. But even as they fled, Elias's eyes flicked toward the shack again. "Someone else is in there." Clara followed his gaze. Through the fire and smoke, a small face appeared in the cracked window. A child. Before she could react, Elias was already moving. "Elias!" Clara screamed. But he didn't slow. He charged into the fire like it was just another chore, wrapping a damp cloth around his face and kicking the door open with one powerful boot. The cabin groaned under the weight of the flames. Clara could barely see through the smoke. Time stretched thin, every second a scream inside her skull. Then he emerged, coughing, covered in ash, carrying a boy no older than 5 in his arms. The child was crying, but alive. Elias stumbled, knees buckling, and Clara ran to catch them both. Together, they half-carried, half-dragged the boy back to the stream. The air felt cooler there, clearer, though the smoke still curled like fingers around their legs. They collapsed in the shallows, the boy clinging to Elias like a barnacle. Clara pressed a hand to Elias's chest. He was breathing, barely, but breathing. "I thought I lost you," she whispered, voice ragged. His eyes cracked open. "Takes more than fire to put me down." She laughed through her tears, a raw, disbelieving sound. They rested only minutes before moving again. The family had gone ahead. The stream would lead them all out. But the forest was dying behind them, and it wouldn't wait. Clara took the boy's hand. Elias walked slower now, one arm pressed his ribs. He was hurt, though he wouldn't say it. She knew by the way he winced with each step. Still, they kept moving. The fire chased them until the very edge of night, when finally, miraculously, the trees opened, the smoke thinned, and the mining road stretched out like salvation. Riders from Ironwood were there, volunteers with wagons and buckets, their faces grim with soot and worry. They took the boy, promised him safety. The couple Clara had saved waved from the back of a wagon, mouths moving in thanks she couldn't hear. She and Elias sat in the dirt, backs against a tree, lungs drawing in the first clean breath in hours. "I thought you were mad," she said quietly, "running into that fire." "I was," he replied, "but not for going in, for even thinking of not going." He turned his head to look at her. "You ran, too, right toward the danger. No hesitation. You would have done the same for me." "I would have," he said. "Still would." Her heart stumbled, not from fear this time, but from something just as wild. They sat in silence, watching the smoke coil into the stars. Around them, the wounded were tended, the flames fought, the stories gathered. But Clara felt something settle deep inside her chest, an ember that had nothing to do with fire, and everything to do with the man beside her. The forest had tested them, broken them down, burned away everything false. What remained was real, strong, and just beginning to take root. The town of Ironwood Gulch stood on the edge of rebirth. In the wake of the fire, the townsfolk moved like shadows, dragging wet blankets across scorched earth, hammering up broken fences, replanting hope one fence post at a time. The sky, once cloaked in smoke, had cleared to a pale, quiet blue. But the people? They were raw, exposed. A town stripped bare sees everything: truth, pride, shame. Clara stood at the edge of the general store's porch, watching it all unfold. A bandage circled her right palm, still pink from the burn she'd earned pulling Elias out of the fire. Her dress, borrowed and too loose at the shoulders, fluttered in the breeze. Her old one had burned like tissue. Elias was nearby, cutting lumber with short, even strokes, his ribs wrapped tight under his shirt. Every movement cost him a wince, but he worked anyway. That was who he was, quiet strength, unspoken endurance. She saw the way people looked at him now. Not just the lumberjack on the hill, but a man who'd run into flame and come back with a child in his arms. But not everyone had softened. Roy Pritchard stood on the boardwalk across the street, arms crossed, eyes narrowed beneath his sweat-stained hat. Word had spread fast about who'd saved who, and how Clara had led two strangers to safety while Roy, tucked safe behind the saloon bar, had lifted nothing heavier than a poker chip. Shame had a way of turning bitter in a man like Roy. He sauntered toward her, slow and smug, like nothing had happened. Well, looks like our mail-order rose bush finally bloomed. Clara didn't flinch. Not anymore. That's right, she said, voice level. And you'd best mind the thorns. Behind her, Elias paused mid-swing. Roy laughed, but it didn't reach his eyes. You think it's 'cause you ran around playing hero with that axe-swinging giant, you belong here now? Clara stepped off the porch, closing the space between them. No, she said. I belong here because I didn't run when it mattered. Roy opened his mouth, likely to spit another insult, but Elias appeared beside her before the words came. He wasn't threatening. He didn't have to be. Roy paled a shade, then muttered something about not worth it, and slunk off toward the saloon. Clara turned to Elias. Pulse steady, heart pounding. I don't need protection. I know, he said, his eyes never leaving hers. But I'll stand beside you anyway. That night, the town gathered for the reckoning. Not the angry kind, but the kind that only comes after the storm. In the rebuilt town hall, lanterns glowed against newly painted walls. Survivors told stories. Losses were named, and so were the unexpected heroes. When Clara's name was spoken, when Elias's was met with applause that shook the rafters, she saw something shift in the faces around them. Respect. Recognition. She gripped his arm as they stood in the back, her fingers threading through the crook of his elbow. The mayor, an old man with lungs like a mule and a heart that beat for the land, made the final toast. To the ones who stood tall when the flames came low, he said, raising a tin cup. To those who didn't just survive, but made us better for it. Clara didn't drink. She just let the words soak into her. This, she realized, was what it felt like to be seen, not for what you should be or what you lacked, but for what you truly were. After the gathering, Elias led her away from a road and down toward the riverbank. The night air was cool, the stars pinpricked and wild above them. I need to show you something, he said, holding out a hand. She took it without hesitation. They walked in silence, the sound of crickets rising around them, the wind teasing the edge of the trees. At the base of a hollowed oak, Elias stopped. He reached into his coat and pulled out something wrapped in a piece of cloth. I carved it the day after the fire, he said, handing it to her. Clara unfolded the cloth. It was a ring, hand-carved from maple wood, smooth to a shine, the inner band etched with tiny letters. Bend, but never break. Her breath caught. I didn't buy it, he said. Didn't think you needed a man to throw money to prove he saw you. I made this. For you. Because you remind me of that tree by the ridge, the one the fire couldn't touch. She looked up at him, eyes glassed with unshed tears. Clara Bell, he said, voice low and steady. You weren't what I expected. You were more. Are more. And I don't want a housewife. I want a partner. I want you. If you'll have me. Her hand trembled as she took the ring and slid it onto her finger. It fit like it had been waiting for her all along. She laughed, half joy, half disbelief, and threw her arms around him, pressing her face to his chest. He held her like he'd never let go. I thought I came here to find a husband, she whispered, but I found a home instead. He kissed her forehead. We'll build it together. Their lips met under the stars, slow and sure, like two things that had always belonged to the same sky. And just beyond them, Ironwood Gulch exhaled, its people sleeping easier knowing the fire was over, outside and within. But as they stood by the river, hand in hand, Clara knew one truth deep in her bones. The greatest blaze had been the one inside her, and she had walked through it, not to be saved, but to be remade. And now, finally, she was whole. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments.